Hello there everyone, it's been over 5 months since I did my last review, and a new review is long overdue. I'm Zimzilla, and today I'll be going over the Kaiju Briarga by my good friend Matt, or Primal Matt 97. Standing at over 150 meters in height, weighing over 180,000 tons, this massive monster possesses a believable weight and stature. His head possesses several bony structures along the skull and mandible, and this scaly armor motif runs along the body to the arms and tail. The most distinct of these structures would be what I dubbed the shoulder pauldrons, which help to give the design an intimidating interior view and imposing lateral view, giving both a distinct silhouette for the creature in of both a front and side view. I wasn't given any direct animal inspirations, however, lizards such as Uramastics and bearded dragons are the first that come to mind when I think of real animals that Briarga could have been based on. When looking at other kaiju, I think of characters such as Neosaurus, Space Godzilla, and even Iris. This is because Neosaurus, Space Godzilla, and Iris all have a lot of head ornamentation as well as body ornamentation, especially in the upper arms, specifically with Space Godzilla's shoulder crystals, and Iris also having similarly large pauldrons. Neosaurus doesn't have similar pauldrons around the shoulders, however, around his body he does have smaller spikes, but it does give that whole upper body a little bit more heft to him, and the illusion of a further strength and power, which helped all of these characters feel more imposing as compared to their antagonists, those being Ultraman Dyna, Godzilla, and Gamera. Proportionally, the main critique I would give has to do with the legs. When looking at them, they are digitigrade and theropod-like in structure, and unlike a monster that's designed with the intent of it being made into a suit, Briarga's legs look a lot more animalistic, and although the legs are not overly thin, some renditions make it appear rather thin. One character that's designed to be overly large and imposing, similar to Briarga, is the Monsterverse Godzilla. Its legs are plantigrade instead of digitigrade, and they're also a lot more stockier, given an illusion and a much more realistic take of Godzilla being able to support his massive heft. And since Briarga is 180,000 tons, which I think is larger than the Monsterverse Godzilla, I think having legs that are similar to this would actually make a lot of sense. However, because the character is designed with a lot more fantasy in mind, this isn't necessarily a problem. And since I am not Alexander the Swell, because he sent me a restraining order, and that's because I slingshotted a few Sonic merch things and maybe a few Cats videos through his window, I can't really get into a big foot fetishism, legs, blah blah blah. That's sort of his thing. So we'll kind of segue into powers. The main reason I didn't bring up Briarga's color is because it kind of ties into his abilities, that being geokinesis. Simply put, it allows the monster to control rocks, stone, and tectonic elements. It justifies a color scheme that is often very neutral and doesn't often get a lot of appeal. And of course, he has a more orangey belly and there's a lot of striping on his body. This is further accentuated in his power-ups. But overall, not a lot of people like using browns, but in the case of a character that controls the earth, I think it makes a lot of sense for him to be brown primarily. Of course, like most kaiju, he's able to be immune to conventional weaponry, and like Godzilla 98, he can burrow, so that's kinda cool. But his geokinesis also allows him to hurl boulders and summon stone pillars from the ground, which is one of the abilities he displays in Daikaiju Daikisen on Steam if you want to actually play as this character, alongside my own. One of the first projectile abilities he possesses is the Tectonic Bellow, which emits sound waves that can disrupt tectonic plates and cause earthquakes. The second is Nasal Crisis, which are nasal horns that can liquefy when launched at foes, and the final one is Crisis Cannon, a plasma-like breath weapon which is powered by an element called Nasporium. This element takes the place of a bloodstream, but it is molten in nature and the energy source behind the Crisis Cannon, along with helping boost his abilities in general. Before I get into the transformations, I want to do a quick side tangent to talk about power scaling. So a character that has control over an element is often very common for creatives to have their attacks be just simple constructs a la Green Lantern, or just basic projectiles such as Sub-Zero. In Briarga's case, we have a giant monster that controls the earth. Can he create flat lines which can instantaneously swallow his foes? How about being able to shoot fast spikes out of the ground? How fast are those spikes? Can he change the density of the earth he wields to hit harder? Could he literally drop a mountain on someone if he felt like it? And since the character is considered a god, the extent of these abilities is important because it raises questions like, if he's able to do all of this with his geokinesis alone, it may invalidate his other powers. This is similar to the Dragon Ball Z problem I see, in this case with Goku. There's often no reason for him to use other ki-based attacks when he has the Kamehameha, and there's only special circumstances where the Spirit Bomb is necessary, so it makes you wonder, if he's able to use other ki attacks, why does he use them at all when the Kamehameha usually gets the job done? The similar case is here. If Briarga is able to use all of these different kinds of abilities with his geokinesis that are often maybe faster or could theoretically be stronger than some of his breath or sort of bellowing weapons, why have them in the first place? That's just something for you to consider, because oftentimes people do not really think creatively about powers that have a lot of creativity in mind, because you're just controlling a simple element, and the imagination that can be done with that is often very vast. But simple power scaling rant over. I'm going to talk about Dragon Ball Z even further, because we're going into this guy's essentially his Super Saiyan forms. So this kaiju also has a sort of spirit energy called Aether, and this allows him to extract certain kinds of transformations, and this comes in junction with his Nasporium and his geokinesis skills. Gleam Spine causes his armor plating to glow in order to regulate the Nasporium and work as a way for the body to become not as burned out while using certain kinds of abilities. This also allows him to use these abilities at an upper limit, as well as sort of always at max power. For a similar instance, if we're going to go back to the Dragon Ball Z train, as I said, this is essentially Super Saiyan when it's first unlocked. It's maybe not the most stamina sort of controlling mechanism, although it's still a lot more conserving than other forms, and it just overall is an increase in power. However, there is also a second part of this, which is the Shimmer, which is essentially able to use the Nasporium at a higher level, and just increases everything across the board. Essentially, this is mastered Super Saiyan by around the Cell Saga for people who are Dragon Ball Z nerds like myself. And then the second transformation, or kind of the Berserk transformation, is the Iron Bird, which focuses more on pure strength rather than stamina consumption. This causes the spines and overall body to go from a brown to dark gold, and the patterning becomes more varied. The armor actually also becomes more segmented, revealing sort of biological events along the body, which can be used as makeshift thrusters, biological cannons, or even railguns of sorts. The downside of this ability is that it uses an Nasporium to a greater extent, and is only used as a last resort. Essentially, I get super powerful, but I'm also essentially killing myself. Going back to Dragon Ball, this is essentially Super Saiyan's grades 2 and 3, which trade speed and stamina for just an overall greater increase in power and a larger strain on the body. And much like any ultimate form, it obviously comes with its own variation of the signature attack, which in this case, the Crisis Cannon now becomes the Crisis Exploder, which visually could be considered a full-body Crisis Cannon, as the Uncover events help in releasing several just combined Crisis Cannons all at once for just that raw increase and just display of power, which is cool. Obviously, I always like my similar Dragon Ball Z analogies to this, so it's sort of like Vegeta's like final explosion from the end of the Buu saga, or the final Kamehameha, stuff like that. And of author's note, he does say that Briarga is very slow and prone to getting hit from the blind spots, which is a good way to limit the character, and an easy way to create antagonists to counter and prey on his weaknesses. But outside of the powers and outside of the appearances, what is Briarga's character? The author compares him to both Kratos and Azura, both from their respective video games, God of War and Azura's Wrath. These are characters that are quick to anger and filled with rage due to being wronged in their past. This provides a good setup and an inciting incident for the character to go on their journey. The character comes from a place called the Elder World, which is a fantasy-oriented area similar to Arda from The Lord of the Rings or Nirn from the Elder Scrolls series. In this realm, Briarga is a god, much like his two influences, and the primary dynamic in this series focuses not only on his goals and motives, but also his connection to a human character that exists in the regular world. This allows for a classical mythological type of story, in that we see often in our own myths, like the gods of Roman, Egyptian, Norse mythology, that although they are far more powerful than mortals and exist almost above them, they still are subject to the similar dilemmas, temptations, and faults that we humans are, oftentimes to just a greater extent. Oftentimes this was done to anthropomorphize the world around them. So this is actually a very good story overall for Briarga, because it's already had a groundwork laid for it with other stories that you could take influence from. And if I was to give my own advice, I would try to make what we know about Briarga more important. So how he interacts with those who worship him, how he views humanity, stuff like that. This sets a precedent and standard for how we judge other interactions with mortals and fellow monsters, so we can see what's outside the norm and what is normal, and how the world generally operates. World building is of course very important. I think this is definitely the biggest part of the world building you need to establish. Of course, I think that you could work on doing more generic style kaiju stories with your character. However, I think sticking to the more fantastical roots that you've established with your world building that I see on places like Instagram will allow your stuff to branch out and be unique compared to what other people are doing. And since you mentioned Elder Scrolls, and I'm pretty informed on that universe, unlike Tolkien's for example, I think what you should do if you want to look at the interactions between a god and their followers, look at the way the Daedra interact with their followers. For specific Daedra, to narrow it down, Molag Bal, Hircine, Azura, and Sheogorath are four that are oftentimes very much important to their worshippers and are often very present in what they're doing and in their daily lives. So I think those are four characters you should look at. And again, since you're studying Elder Scrolls, I'm always happy to do some consulting on that to point you in the direction of other things you could work on that you have not mentioned here. But that's all I've got for you guys. I think that with Briarga, there really isn't much to do in terms of critique. You have a character that's very well designed, not much anatomical errors that really need to be fixed, just maybe the legs, but other than that, character looks awesome, definitely unique. Powers are fine, just make sure you focus on power scaling them correctly so you don't invalidate the other powers you've set up, and therefore the world building you've set up with your magic system, with your Nasporium, and the Aether. Set up the world around you. You've been doing that on Instagram. That's a very good job. Just make sure that you establish how this character, who is a god, interacts with his followers and therefore the main human that he has a connection with. That's going to be very important in terms of a hook, as well as keeping us invested as not just a monster, but also as a character. I have to really thank Matt for being so patient to get this review out for him. It's been a long time since he requested it, and it's been a long time since I've been working on it. I really hope it's up to stuff, and I hope that all of you who are watching who aren't Matt enjoyed it as well. And maybe you'll see some new videos very soon, hopefully in the future coming down the line. But as always, guys, I'm Zimzilla, and I'll see you all next time.